that any child could be successful and also feel important and part of an integrated community.
Hi, welcome to PWRMUMS podcast. Today we're joined by Dr. Vanessa von Auer, who is the founding principal of Integrated International School. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Would you mind introducing yourself a little bit about where you came from, why you started IIS?
Sure. So I'm Vanessa. I've been in Singapore for over 20 years and I'm a clinical psychologist by training. I started the VA Psychology Center in 2008. And during that initial year, I had about 5 children under the age of 6 who were asked to leave the big mainstream international schools. So they came to me for behavioral, emotional, social skills, and I did one-on-one therapy with them. And the parents just got to know each other in the waiting room, and they banded together and asked me if I could start a school. So being in my early 20s, I wasn't very risk averse, didn't know how much work it would be to actually start a program like the Integrated International School. But we were quite successful, and within a year, we jumped up from 5 students to 23 students,
wow.
Which indicated to me that there was really a big need here in Singapore to help children feel safe and comfortable so that they can have an equal opportunity to learn.
I've never met with anybody that started a school before, so I'm kind of excited. And so what made you think, apart from these parents banding together and coercing a 20-something-year-old to start school, what made you think, okay, I can make this work?
I just really believed in these children I was working with. You know, if you look at any child, they have so much potential. They're usually very positive. You know, children are not born with a negative sense of life. They're very curious, they're kind, but some of the children just learn differently and learn at a different pace. Mm-hmm. And I really believe that if we accommodated that learning and their preferred learning style, that any child could be successful and also feel important and part of an integrated community. Hence the name, Integrated International School.
And so you have a lot more than 23 children now.
Yes.
How many children?
We are up to about 80 students right now. We've grown slowly and organically because I wanted to make sure that our program is stable, that the quality is of a high standard, and we also take a lot of time to train our staff. Our teachers need that training unless they've been in a similar environment, and there are not that many schools in Singapore like IIS, so we take a lot of time to really support new staff, to give them our specialized training. We use things like Teach, which is a very structured way of setting up the environment and teaching children, and we really want to focus on a learner-centered approach, meaning all children have their own individualized education plan that works for them, which again ensures that they really love learning and that they're successful in their own time.
Fantastic. And you have a lot of children, I know, that come to you and they don't stay with you for their whole educational life, right?
Yes.
That you are able to integrate them back into mainstream school.
Absolutely. So that's definitely one of our goals. Yeah. Some of our kids come to the school as a stepping stone. So they'll be with us for about a couple of years, 3 years, where we work on some of the areas of need that made it difficult for them to integrate in a big, 2,000 student international school. Yeah. So some things could be just things like learning how to cope with anxiety, performance anxiety, social anxiety, being able to stand up for themselves when children are being unkind, mm-hmm. when they're teasing them, being able to understand that making mistakes is actually a really great thing and an awesome way to learn. I think it's really about teaching children that they are good enough and they're worthy of being in a community setting. Unfortunately, sometimes I think in the bigger settings, in the bigger schools, the teachers might not have the resource or the time to give that TLC to that particular student. And so we pride ourselves on doing that for our kids. And when we've boosted their confidence and we've closed some of their learning gaps, they're ready to fly and go back to a bigger international school.
Yeah.
And we've had many children actually graduate into the mainstream school setting again.
Yeah, and that must be a huge success for you
It's
guys.
amazing.
Yeah.
It's the best feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about the challenges? Because you were obviously a bit of a pioneer in this field in Singapore.
Yes.
You said yourself there weren't many of these institutions around or schools around.
Right.
What have been the challenges?
So when I first started, I was connected to a lot of the schools here because I would go in to do teacher trainings as a clinical psychologist. I did diagnostic assessments, so I had to observe the children in the international school setting. And so when I reached out to the international schools, a lot of them were super positive and supportive because they realized they didn't have the resources or the skills to support individualized learning. But some of them called and said, this concept will not work. You need to have a big campus, you need to have the glitzy facilities for students to enroll. Okay. And for me, I just really believed that the concept of loving a child holistically and supporting that child holistically would matter more than a huge campus with an Olympic-sized pool and tennis courts and so on and so forth. And I think we've been around 11, 12 years now. We've proven that because our students come to IAS, they feel really positive about themselves, they have a growth mindset and they leave with a growth mindset, and they are welcomed into the bigger international schools when they are ready to transition out.
You're beyond a business. You saw a real need, and you don't need all those facilities for your particular niche.
Yes.
Yeah.
My team and I care most about who our children are, who they themselves want to be. And so, an example I can give you, we had a little 6-year-old come to school recently, and she was bullied really badly because she had dyslexia. So she would hide in the bathroom during recess because she was being picked on. And so when she came to us, when I interviewed her, when we have our family meetings, she asked me if she was going to be bullied at IIS. And we have a very strict, no bullying policy. And she's been with us for a few months, and she is a social butterfly. She is, gives compliments to everyone.
Awesome.
She's just come out of her shell, and she's super confident. And she'll come to my office and she'll greet me in the morning, say, "I love being here." And that's the coolest experience you can have for such a little child to come in with low self-esteem, and within a few months to feel safe and feel important and feel that they can learn despite having challenges.
Yeah. Oh, I have goosebumps.
That's why I love my job.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you think you were going to be a school principal growing up?
Never. Never. And I joke with some of the parents because when I was deciding what I wanted to do, someone suggested, "Oh, why don't you work with kids? Why don't you become a teacher?" And I said, "No, that just seems like a lot of work." And so I refused, and which is why I went the psychology route, and I thought I was going to be a practicing clinical psychologist, which I was for many years. But then IS just became bigger and required more of my time. And so now that I am in this position, I still laugh because, someone suggested it many years ago. I said no, and here I am as an educator.
Yeah. And you're very affectionately known as Dr.V.
Yes, I'm very proud of that name.
So Dr.V is like your little
cool
nickname that you're known by to a lot of people as Dr.V, right?
Yes. Yeah. So all of my students call me Dr.V. Actually, two of my pioneer students many years ago when we first started gave me that name. One was a little 5-year-old who couldn't make the sound V. So he would always say, Vanessa. And so we just tried to teach him Vanessa. And then he at some point just said, "No, I can't say V." He said, "I can't say B." And he's like, "So I'll just say Dr.V."
Oh, with the finger.
And then the very drawn out. But I thought that was so cool again because he had some language delay.
Yeah.
But he tried so hard to make that sound, even though it's very challenging. And then one of my teenagers, a girl, said, Dr. Vanessa van Auer is not cool.
I think it's pretty cool. That shows I'm old.
We're not that old.
No.
And so she said, you know, Dr.V is cool. So she's like, I'm going to call you Dr.V. And I was like, I will take that.
You are the Dr.V of clinical psychology.
There you go. I'll take it.
That's great. And you're not just a principal. You are also a mum of 2.
I am. Yeah, very proud mama.
Yeah. And I've just met one of your little girls who is gorgeous.
Thank you.
So how old are your girls?
So they're 3 and 5. The one that you saw is 3.
Very chatty for 3.
Very chatty, very sociable, happy child. Yeah, just the loves of my life. Yeah. And again, you know, I started IS before I had children because I just believed children had the right to be treated in a loving, kind, supportive manner, no matter what the challenge is. And now that I have children, I believe in that even more, because you can see how an adult's reaction to children makes such a huge difference in their personality, in their perspective of life, in their persistence. So I think any child can learn, but it's the approach that really matters.
Yeah. And so both of your girls were born in Singapore.
Yes.
So talk to me about your maternity leave. How cool was your maternity leave?
I didn't get any maternity leave. I think that's the downside of being a business owner, because you're really, well, if you're like me, you want to be very involved. So with both of my kids, within the first week of giving birth, I had them strapped in my carrier, and I was at work for a couple hours here and there.
Yeah.
So they grew up at IIS. They even went to my preschool program. They loved it. Our preschool program, we really believe in the Reggio Emilia philosophy. And again, it's very child-centered and very loving, very supportive. Yeah, so they're IIS babies as well.
Yeah. And before Singapore, where were you? What was your life like?
So my family traveled quite a bit and stayed in different parts of Asia. I am originally German, but most of my life I've been in different parts of Asia. So I've been in the international school system, which helped me kind of understand what works for international students. But I'm also half Asian, so I understand the intricacies of different cultures and how to make children of all backgrounds feel welcome in our school community.
And that leads me on to my next question, which is that a lot of the kids in your school would have a diagnosis of autism, am I right? It's
a variety of diagnoses. So we have some children who are undiagnosed, but struggle with anxiety, self-esteem, maybe some language delay or even impairment. And then we have children who do have learning difficulties or diagnoses like ADHD, autism spectrum disorders, dyslexia, dysgraphia. And we really try to accept any child at IIS that can learn. So we are an academic program. We follow the Australian curriculum, so our children do need to advance through the grade levels. But because we scaffold their learning, give them lots of individualized support in a group setting. So we're set up, like a mainstream school, but in a much smaller size, and they get much more support. So therefore, they are quite successful regardless of their diagnoses.
And do you find you have to do quite a lot of education with parents as a way of telling them it's okay for your kids to come to our school?
Yes.
And it's actually a good thing, because that means there's a lot of hope there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the hardest thing, I think, is when parents come and they're still not quite all right with the label, or even if the children don't have a diagnosis, the actual learning challenges or the developmental delays, of course, are hard for any parent to accept, especially if you just have received the diagnosis. But I really believe that every human being has differences. The way my brain works is different to yours. Yeah. And so the way I explain it to parents is similar to that. I normalize it. And at IS, again, a lot of what we try to do is for our students to feel part of the community, that they're typical children that just need a little bit more TLC, a little bit more individualized support to close the learning gaps and be part of mainstream society. And which is why we're very open at IIS about different learning challenges. And you'll see the kids are fantastic about understanding it when you talk to them openly, because they'll go like, oh yeah, that's my ADHD, I'm fidgeting. So for example, we've got a really gorgeous 9-year-old who visits my marketing manager on a daily basis to have a chat. And he'll go in and he'll say, you know, I had to take a break from class because I'm getting really fidgety, I'm moving around. And, you know, the marketing manager will engage and say, what do you think that is? He's like, oh, that's my ADHD, it's my brain works differently. So I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's a normal thing for him.
Yep.
He knows how to deal with it. He's got coping skills. He needed to go for a walk along the corridors and visit my marketing manager.
Yeah. Have a bit of a chit chat.
Yes.
Probably make her day.
Yes, exactly. She loves his visits.
A bit of a different job, yeah. And how does your school, apart from being on a smaller scale, how else does your school differ? Because I know there's some pretty cool rooms in your school.
Yes.
Could you talk me through those pretty cool rooms?
So we have some pretty unique feature rooms. One of them is our Ocean Snurzeln room. It's
Say again.
Ocean Snurzeln. It's a room to help children that are overstimulated or understimulated kind of process whatever they're going through, take a break, decompress, and then be able to rejoin the class. And so if you imagine interactive light displays, fiber optics, and we've got bubble tubes like the one right behind you, if you can see. Yes, there you go. And we've got, you know, ceiling mounts of dolphin swimming. So it's a pretty neat place to just take a break and calm down.
Yeah.
And again, we really foster that. Whatever the child thinks is helpful, we encourage them to engage in. It's really great self-regulation when you think about, even as adults, to say, I'm getting frustrated with my work and what can I do about it? Okay, I need to go take a break in this room, or I need to go, you know, run around the office.
Go to the pantry and eat some
exactly, have a cake break. And these kids are learning these fundamentally important skills at an early age. For many of us, we only learned, you know, how to deal with stress, how to acquire specific coping skills to deal with anxiety, stress, or anger at a much later stage in adulthood.
Yep.
And our kids, we're trying to teach that on a day-to-day basis, which is why we have on-site counselors, we've got occupational therapists, speech therapists, we've got a behavioral therapist, that all work together with the teachers to provide a almost personally carved out education plan for each student.
We have a saying in healthcare, multidisciplinary team.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, it's like that, isn't
Absolutely.
it? You've got everybody working together,
Yes.
looking at a child holistically rather than a member of a class.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also the cool thing about having a multidisciplinary team is that they all work together. So what the speech therapist is working on in the one-on-one sessions, she will communicate that to the teachers. The teacher will use the same techniques in the group setting in the classroom. So everything is consistent and progress is seen much quicker because everyone is consistent.
And consistency is really key, isn't it?
Super.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about how do people self-refer? Do people get referred by another clinical psychologist? How does it work for when you have new students?
Yeah, so we're lucky that we've built up our reputation over the years. We work with various support members of the community, psychologists, counselors, pediatricians, GPs, and then of course we also have good relationships with the international schools who have taken our kids when they're ready to transition. I think because of what we do, and we're a very community-based school, so you know we've got close relationships with our parents and stakeholders. Word of mouth is definitely what has helped us grow, and for people to understand what we are trying to achieve, which is to redefine success. You know, if you look at the traditional definition of success, it's usually academic, right? Who's got top marks? Who's the best student in languages and math and science? And for us, our aim really is to redefine success for each child, because you know, children have different talents and preferences and likes. So you might have a child who's highly gifted in math, and another one who is highly gifted in languages or in arts or singing or music. So we really want to foster that and redefine success.
I love that. That's fantastic. And so today's podcast is a little bit different because Vanessa is actually going to go through some parenting tips that will be very useful for you all, I'm sure. So You've got the mic.
Okay, thank you. So I thought about anxiety during COVID-19 times. We certainly went through it. The uncertainty of how long this is going to be drawn out makes us anxious, but imagine what our young children must be going through, having to wear masks to school every day, not being able to give their bestie a hug, not being able to have full class birthday parties, right? These are all things that they were accustomed to, and now that's no longer allowed. So I thought it might be good to discuss some tips on how to support our children during these very uncertain and anxiety-provoking times. So number one, people always ask me, should I tell my child the truth about COVID-19? My answer to that is, it's better to know than not to know, right? So I think it's important to explain to children what has happened, that COVID-19 is a virus that's making people sick, which is why we need to wear masks and have all of the safety restrictions going on. So the facts should be age appropriate, obviously. You're going to tell a younger child something more general, but you're going to give them some answers. Why? Well, they have vivid imaginations and very curious minds. And so if we don't tell them what is going on factually and in an age-appropriate manner, they will come up with their own answers, which may not always be a good thing. You know, they might come up with really scary answers because they're confused and they're not sure how to explain this time in our lives to themselves. So I would say, yes, give them some facts that are age-appropriate. Then the second thing is, you will see your children through this period go through various emotions. Initially, when we were in circuit breaker, I know my children were frustrated, irritable, sad, anxious. There was a whole bunch of emotions going on.
Like me.
All of us. But that's why I think it's so important to be open with our children and to explain to a certain extent what's going on. So that extends to their feelings, because young children may not have the language to explain fully what they're going through, or because they're little, they still don't understand completely what the emotion is that they're feeling. So what looks like anger could actually stem from anxiety, right? What looks like anxiety could be sadness. And so the next tip would be to help identify and label the feeling. I can give you an example. My oldest child refused to go on Zoom classes and where she could interact with her classmates. Refused for 2 weeks. And she was irritable and grumpy. And so I just thought, that's odd. She's just grumpy, right? But I was really confused because she loves social interaction. She's a little social butterfly. So didn't understand that feeling. And when I asked her about it, she always just said she didn't want to, she didn't like it. So I thought initially it was anger. I kept digging a little bit, and turns out she didn't want to go on because she didn't want to miss her friends, which makes sense, right?
Makes perfect sense. You see them and you can't see them.
And you can't interact physically, right? Which is what they're so used to. So she was missing them, and she was getting sad because she saw them but couldn't interact. So that's when we then understood, okay, so actually, sweetheart, you're sad, and that makes sense, that's understandable, because you want to be in their presence and you want to play physically. So once we explained that to her, she was fine. Next day, she went back on Zoom and she interacted with her kids. So that's sometimes really therapeutic, just to be able to identify and understand the feeling the children are going through.
And I guess not underestimating what they're going through.
Absolutely.
They are just little us.
They are.
Little adults.
And you know, for us, it's simple, or simpler, not always simple, but simpler, to explain to ourselves what we're going through, right? We've had that years of experience, we have the language abilities, but they don't. So it must be really frustrating to feel something that you can't fully explain to other people, and therefore you may not be able to also ask for help in an appropriate manner, right?
That must be interesting for you. You had to sort of put your doctor hat on to analyze your little girl. I'm sure you have to do that all the time.
Yes. Home-based learning was very, very difficult for us. And, you know, my kids had very different reactions, which is what really got me thinking about all of these feelings different children must be going through. So once you've identified and labeled, next step is we want to give them an outlet to vent. You know, you might not be so used to seeing your child anxious or angry, but it is important for you to explain to them that there's a safe space for them to do it, that they won't get in trouble. In fact, if you tell me what you need from me, a hug, a little bit more device time, you know, a nice snack, that you will be flexible and present as a parent to give that to them. So that will be tip number 3. Tip number 4 really is to point out the positives of COVID-19. There are actually quite a few positives. For example, my children always want me to spend more time with them. I'm usually at work, right? Monday to Friday. Sometimes I go in on the weekend. And so this period has given us time to spend more together, to interact more, to, you know, we became master bakers during home-based learning, and artists, because every day we had some sort of art project. And you can see that obviously that quality time with you makes such a big difference to their mood and also their motivation and also their perspective of it's going to be okay. There is good stuff that comes with this, right? The other thing I used to point out, and now they're kind of over because everyone has fancy masks, is how cool we look with our fancy superhero masks, right? So there's positives you can certainly point out. Then the other thing would be what I was getting a lot of feedback from my clients from is kind of this fatigue or burnt out feeling. So almost, we don't really have lockdown here, but we're still restricted, right? We have curfew 10:30 almost, where all of the food establishments close. We can only have 5 people coming over at a time to visit and no big gatherings. So while we have gotten back into a routine that's outside of the house, there is a routine, right? It's almost like Groundhog Day over and over because we can't travel, we can't attend events. And so the children must be feeling similarly, right? They have their school, at least they can go back to school now, but it's still a routine that doesn't change much on a day-to-day basis. So I think to combat that fatigue, it will be great to kind of infuse some spontaneity and some novel experiences for our children. Singapore has a lot of culture, it's very rich in culture, really cool places to explore with the kids. So you could do things like go on a photography hunt or tour, right? So you just give your children your iPhones or your Androids and you go and look for the most colorful shop house in Singapore. Joo Chiat is a nice place to start, right?
My hood.
There you go. Chinatown is beautiful. You could do, if you don't want to do a full staycation, what we've done, which the kids really love, was a picnic in a tent at a park that we haven't been to or at a beach that we haven't been to. So just infuse a little bit of novelty into the child's life. And then finally, I think we all need to kind of be aware of how we're feeling as adults, because that does rub off so quickly and easily on our children. We don't have to say anything, right? If we're not feeling good, you can see that that affects our kids' moods and also how they view this. I think the goal of our parenting for this period would really be to help our children come out of COVID-19 resilient, right? And so how we react and how we perceive the situation is going to impact how they think about it and how they remember it. So again, being a little bit more positive.
At least in front of them.
Yes, exactly. If you need to vent.
10 p.m.
Exactly. When they're gone. And I think flexibility also helps us. So, you know, we can't do a lot of things that we had in mind or that we planned for this year. Okay, so how can we change those plans to still suit our needs and our children's needs?
Yeah. I think you made a really interesting point, just going back to the being a bit spontaneous. Not being able to travel, there is a lot that you can do that doesn't cost a lot of money. It just takes a bit of imagination and creativity, and that can bring out the inner child in parents as well. So I think what a great bonding experience that could be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And can I ask a question about parents working from home, being present? So parents are having a lot more time with their kids, but they're also trying to juggle working.
Yes.
And so have you got any tips for being present with your kids whilst also trying to get your work done so that you're not fired, so that you're always present with your kids?
Yeah, that is really a tricky one. Yeah. I struggle with that, but I think, again, open communication. And in this case, it's good to have a routine or a schedule or some sort of signal, a cue to your children that, you know, from 9 to 5, these are work hours, lunchtime we can have as a family. So you could have a pictorial schedule for them to understand that if they're really little, and then making sure that you stick to that routine, because it's almost like a promise, right? I'm going to have lunch with you, I'm going to have dinner with you, and the rule should be that the devices are not at arm's length, preferably in a different room, so that we as working adults are not tempted to be on them constantly and to respond to work. Another tip I think that's helpful is to make sure that you have a workspace, and kids know when you're in that workspace, you know, it's not mom-child time, dad-child time, but it's work time. With me, for example, I didn't have that much space when we were in home-based learning. During circuit breaker, I told them, my cue to them when I had earphones in, that was when I was on Zoom. And I couldn't afford to have any interruptions during those times. So it took me about 3-4 days, and I just, you know, pointed whenever I was on Zoom. We had a chat before I would go on to prepare them that they, I please ask their cooperation not to interrupt. And by the 3rd or 4th day, every time they saw my earphones in, they would come, they would approach, but they would be quiet and then they'd leave. So I think just having some clear guidelines and making it a team effort, saying, you know, yes, we get to spend more quality time, and that's so awesome, that's what I've wanted for a long time, but I also have my responsibilities at work, and when these things happen, or when you see when you see me with my earphones, or when you see my door closed, it means that it's adult time or work time.
And fingers crossed we're not going back to lockdown or any more home-based learning. All the parents out there are like, why? No.
Yes, it was not one of my favorite times. It was just a lot. I think for most working parents to, like I said, be present and, you know, be kind and be child-centered when you're trying to juggle your team, other parents, in my case, our students. It was quite a challenge, but I think most of the parents out there that I've spoken to really adjusted and did come up with a routine. So I think in this case, when we're working from home, the routine aspect, or a schedule, clear guidelines is important to have.
I think those tips are very helpful, and I think it's important to make things clear for kids, but also make it easy, bite-sized for parents, because it's unprecedented times, and none of us have done this before, and so making it as easy as possible, I guess you can have more success.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really happy. As I said, I've never met anyone that started a school, been a principal, or got a cool name like Dr.V. So you're a power mum in my book. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.